After my daughter-in-law robbed me and kicked me out, I went to my ex-husband's house as my last hope. His new wife opened the door. Inside, the stepson I raised as if he were my own was on his knees cleaning the floor. "Faster, you useless, weak boy," she yelled. My desperation turned into fury, and what I did next made that woman regret the day she was born. I am glad to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment what city you are watching from. That way, I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought my own son would look me in the eyes and lie to me with such ease. Michael was 42 years old, but in that moment, sitting across from me at my kitchen table with those documents spread out, he looked like the same little boy who used to lie to me about who had broken Grandma's vase. "Mom, they are just health insurance papers," he told me. His voice was so calm that it made me feel silly for doubting. "The agent said you need to sign here so your coverage stays up to date." Jennifer, my daughter-in-law, was standing by the window, pretending to admire the flowers I had planted in the spring, but I could see her reflection in the glass, and the smile forming on her lips was not exactly warm. She was wearing that expensive blouse I had seen at the mall the week before with a $300 price tag that had seemed obscene to me at the time. "Why don't I look it over first?" I asked, reaching for the papers. Michael pulled them away with a quick gesture. "Mom, there's no time. The agent is waiting in the car. If we don't sign today, your insurance will be canceled, and you know how expensive everything is at the hospital." He was right about the medical costs. At 65 years old, I had had my share of health scares, and the bills always kept me awake at night. Last year, a simple visit to the cardiologist had cost me $500, even with insurance. I took the pen Michael handed me. It was a fancy pen, the kind that costs more than $50, not like the cheap ones I bought at the grocery store. Everything in Michael and Jennifer's life seemed expensive lately. Their new house, their new car, the vacations to Europe they couldn't stop talking about. "Are you sure this is necessary?" I insisted one more time. "Of course, Mom. Why would I lie to you?" That question hit me right in the heart. Why would he lie to me? He was my son, the boy I had raised alone after his father died when he was only 12 years old. The same boy I had worked 2 jobs for just to pay for his college. The same one who had cried in my arms when his first love left him. The same one who had promised me he would always take care of me. I signed the papers. Michael picked them up immediately, folding them and slipping them into an envelope that Jennifer handed him from her purse. It was then that I noticed the envelope already had my address written on it in handwriting I didn't recognize. "Done," Michael said, kissing my cheek with the same coldness he would use to kiss a stranger. "Everything is sorted." They left as quickly as they had arrived. They didn't even stay for the coffee I had prepared, nor for the chocolate chip cookies I had baked, because I knew Michael had loved them since he was a little boy. The house fell silent, filled only with the aroma of coffee that no one would drink and the echo of their footsteps fading away. 3 weeks passed before the first letter arrived. It was from a lawyer. At first, I thought it was spam, one of those fake letters trying to scam older people. But when I called the number on the letterhead, the secretary confirmed it was real. "Mrs. Sarah Miller?" "Yes, that's me. I have a copy of the property transfer documents you signed on March 23rd. Can you confirm when you plan to vacate the property?" The world stopped. "Transfer of what property?" "The house located at 128 Maple Street." "Ma'am, the documents show that you voluntarily transferred the property to Mr. Michael Miller and Mrs. Jennifer Miller." The phone slipped from my hands. My house. My house that I had paid off over 30 years, where I had raised Michael, where all my memories with my late husband were. The documents I had signed weren't for health insurance. They were the deed to my house. I called Michael immediately. It rang 5 times before he answered. "Mom, I'm in an important meeting." "Michael, what did you do?" My voice trembled so much I could barely speak. There was a long pause, too long. "Mom, calm down. We can talk about this later." "No, we will talk about this right now. You stole my house." Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. It was no longer the patient tone he used with me. It was cold, calculated. "I didn't steal anything from you, Mom. You signed the papers voluntarily. Because you told me it was for insurance." "That's what you remember, but the documents are clear. You transferred the property because you wanted to secure our future." I couldn't breathe. My own son, the person I trusted most in the world, had lied to me, deceived me, robbed me. Michael, please, it's my house. It's all I have. Mom, we already talked about this. Your memory isn't what it used to be. It's better that Jenny and I handle these important matters. My memory? I remember perfectly that you told me it was for insurance. Look, Mom, I don't want to argue with you. We've made the decision. You can stay in the house for now, but we are going to need you to find another place soon. He hung up. I stood there holding the dead phone, feeling as if my heart had been ripped right out of my chest. Over the next few days, I tried to contact Michael over and over again. My calls went straight to voicemail. When I finally managed to speak with Jennifer, her response was even colder. Sarah, we understand this is difficult for you, but Michael and I have decided this is for the best. You're starting to forget things, and we can't allow you to make major financial mistakes. Financial mistakes? This is my house. It was your house, she corrected me. Now it's ours. And frankly, Sarah, a woman of your age shouldn't be living alone in such a big house. It's dangerous. Jennifer, please. I am your mother-in-law. I helped raise your children when you were working. How can you do this to me? I'm not doing anything to you, Sarah. I'm just protecting my family. That was the last conversation we had before they showed up at my door 2 weeks later. It was a Tuesday morning. I was watering my flowers when I saw Michael's car park in front of the house. My heart filled with hope. Maybe he had come to apologize. Maybe he had found a way to fix this misunderstanding. But when he got out of the car, he wasn't alone. Jennifer was with him, and behind them were 2 men in overalls carrying boxes. "Hi, Mom," Michael said, but his tone was businesslike, not a son's greeting. "What is going on?" I asked, though deep down, I already knew the answer. "We're here for your things," Jennifer said. "It's time for you to move." "Move? Where?" Michael avoided my gaze. "You'll find something, Mom. There are nice apartments for seniors downtown." "With what money, Michael?" "My only income is my $1,200 from Social Security. I can't afford an apartment." "Well, you'll have to figure it out," Jennifer said, already directing the men toward the door. "Start with the master bedroom." I watched them enter my house as if it were theirs, because legally, now it was. "Michael, please," I begged, grabbing my son's arm. "I am your mother. You can't leave me on the street." He finally looked at me, but the eyes staring back weren't my little boy's. They were the eyes of a stranger. "Mom, you're a grown woman. It's time you learned to take care of yourself." Those words cut me deeper than any knife. For 50 years, since he was born, I had sacrificed everything for him. I had given up dating, better-paying job opportunities, my own dreams, all to make sure he had the best life possible. And now he was telling me to learn to take care of myself. I packed what I could into 2 suitcases, clothes, some photographs, the pearl earrings my husband had given me for our anniversary. The men took everything else. The furniture I had bought with such effort, the television, even the dishware that had belonged to my mother. "The jewelry stays," Jennifer said when she saw I was trying to take it. "It's part of the house's value. These are my personal jewels. They were in the house when you signed the transfer. Technically, they are ours." Michael didn't say anything. My son, who had once cried when he lost his stuffed rabbit, stood there while his wife stripped me of even the memories of my late husband. When they finished, I stood on the sidewalk with my 2 suitcases, watching Jennifer change the locks on the front door. My house, where I had lived for 30 years, where I had raised my son, where I had mourned my husband's death, was no longer mine. Michael walked up to me before leaving. For a moment, I thought he was going to hug me, to tell me that this was all a terrible mistake. "Mom," he said, "I hope you understand that this is for your own good." Then he got into his car and drove away, leaving me standing there as the sun set and I had nowhere to go. That night, I slept in a homeless shelter. I, Sarah Miller, who had worked her whole life, who had raised a son, who had paid taxes for 40 years, was sleeping on a cardboard-thin bed next to strangers who smelled of alcohol and despair. But as I lay there in the dark, a memory began to take shape. A memory of happier times, when my love for a child had been met with the same intensity. A child who didn't share my blood, but who had filled my heart in a way I now understood Michael never had. Arthur, Christian's son. I spent 3 days in that shelter before I found the courage to do what I knew I had to do. 3 days of sleeping on a metal cot, eating watery soup served by volunteers who looked at me with pity, listening to other women tell stories similar to mine, stories of children who had abandoned them, of families that had forgotten them, of lives that had fallen apart when they least expected it. But I had something many of them didn't. A memory that gave me hope. A memory of 15 years with Christian Hayes, and more importantly, of the boy who had come into my life when he was just 8 years old. I met Christian 5 years after my husband died. Michael was 17 then, and I had spent so much time focusing on raising him alone that I had forgotten what it was like to have an adult conversation that didn't revolve around schoolwork or spending money. Christian worked at the bank where I had my account, and what started as questions about my mortgage slowly turned into longer conversations, coffee after work, and eventually something resembling love again. But the real gift wasn't Christian, it was Arthur. The first time I saw him, he was sitting in his dad's car waiting, while Christian drove me home after a date. He was a small boy, with dark hair and huge eyes, watching me with that direct curiosity only children have. His mother had died in a car accident when he was 6, and Christian had been raising him alone ever since. "Do you want to meet Sarah?" Christian asked him, opening the car door. Arthur nodded shyly. As he walked up to me, I noticed he was wearing a t-shirt 2 sizes too big and shoes that needed to be replaced. Christian worked hard, but it was clear that life as a single father was overwhelming him. "Hi," he told me, his voice barely audible. "Hi, Arthur," I replied, crouching down to his level. "Your dad has told me a lot about you." "Like what?" "Like how you are very good at math, and that you know how to make paper airplanes that fly all the way from the living room to the kitchen." His eyes lit up. "Do you want me to show you?" That was the moment my heart melted completely. Not for Christian, though I loved him, but for that little boy who desperately needed a mother figure in his life. Over the next few months, as my relationship with Christian deepened, my bond with Arthur grew in ways I hadn't anticipated. Michael was already a teenager, absorbed in his own problems and friends, but Arthur needed me in a way that reminded me why I had loved being a mother so much. I started staying at their house on weekends. I cooked real meals for them, not just the frozen dinners Christian had been serving. I helped Arthur with his homework, bought him clothes that actually fit, took him to get haircuts, little things that made a huge difference in the life of a boy who had been navigating without a compass. "Sarah," he said to me one night while I was helping him put on his pajamas, "are you going to stay forever? Do you want me to stay?" "Yes." "Dad is happier when you're here." "And so am I." That conversation was what convinced me to officially move in with them a year later. Michael was already in college by then, visiting only on holidays and growing more distant. But Arthur needed me every day, and I needed to feel needed. The next 15 years were the happiest of my adult life. I raised Arthur as if he were my own son, more present in his daily life than I had been able to be with Michael. Because of the circumstances, I went to all his school plays, all his soccer games, all the parent-teacher meetings. On his first day of middle school, I was the one who cried in the car after dropping him off. When he broke his arm skateboarding at 13, I was the one who stayed awake all night watching over him. Michael visited occasionally, but there was always tension. He didn't like sharing my attention, especially with a boy who wasn't really his brother. During one particularly tense Christmas dinner when Arthur was 12, Michael made a cruel comment about how I seemed to love another man's son more than my own. "Michael," I told him firmly, "Arthur is part of this family." "He's not part of my family," he replied. "He's just your boyfriend's kid." Arthur had heard everything from the kitchen. That night, I found him crying in his room. "Is it true that I'm not part of the family?" he asked me. "You are the most important part of my family," I told him, hugging him, "no matter what anyone else says." But Michael's comment had planted a seed of insecurity in Arthur that I could never completely erase. As he grew up, there was always a small part of him that wondered if he truly belonged, if he was truly wanted. Christian and I ended our relationship when Arthur was 23. It wasn't dramatic. There was no betrayal or infidelity. We simply reached different conclusions about what we wanted for our remaining years. He wanted to travel, explore, have adventures. I wanted stability. A quiet routine. Time with the grandchildren I hope to have someday. The breakup was amicable, but still devastating. I wasn't just losing Christian. I was losing Arthur, the young man I had raised for 15 years, who had called me Mom Sarah since he was 10, suddenly felt awkward about maintaining a relationship with me without Christian as the intermediary. "Maybe it's best if we have some space," he had told me, avoiding my gaze, "so you can focus on your own family." My own family. As if he hadn't been my own family for 15 years. We wrote to each other occasionally at first, birthday cards, holiday text messages, but gradually, like all relationships that aren't actively nurtured, our communication faded into silence. That was 2 years ago. Now, standing outside the shelter with my 2 suitcases, betrayed by the son of my own blood, the memory of Arthur felt like my only remaining connection to something resembling family love. I took 3 buses to get to Christian's neighborhood. The house looked different, better kept than I remembered. The lawn was perfectly manicured, the windows sparkled, and there was a new car in the driveway, a blue BMW that was definitely not the old Honda Christian drove when we were together. I stood on the sidewalk for 20 minutes, trying to gather courage. What would I say? How would I explain that I had come because I had nowhere else to go? What would Christian think of me showing up at his door like a beggar? But there were no alternatives. The shelter was only letting me stay 1 more week, and after that, I would literally be on the street. I rang the doorbell. The woman who opened the door was definitely not who I expected to see. She was young, maybe 45, with perfectly styled blonde hair and salon nails that probably cost more than my weekly food budget. She was wearing designer clothes, even just lounging at home, and she looked at me with the expression a rich person uses when they find a door-to-door salesman on their porch. "Yes, excuse me. I'm looking for Christian Hayes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Her eyes scanned me from top to bottom, taking note of my worn-out shoes, my cheap clothes, the suitcases I was carrying. "And you are?" "Sarah Miller." "I am. I was. I knew Christian. A few years ago." "Ah," she said, and something in her tone shifted. It wasn't exactly hostility, but it definitely wasn't a welcome. "You're the ex." Before I could answer, I heard heavy footsteps approaching down the hallway. "Who is it, honey?" Christian's voice sounded exactly the same as I remembered. "It's Sarah," the woman said without taking her eyes off me. Christian appeared behind her, and for a moment, his face showed genuine surprise. He had grayed a bit, gained some weight around the middle, but otherwise, he looked good. He looked prosperous. He looked happy. "Sarah," he said, and I could hear the awkwardness in his voice. What a surprise. "Hi, Christian," I managed to say. "I'm sorry to just show up unannounced like this." The blonde woman stood a little taller. "I'm Valerie," she said, with a tone that made it clear she was the lady of the house now. "Christian's wife." Wife? Of course he had married again. Why had I assumed he wouldn't? "Congratulations," I said, though the words came out forced. "What brings you by?" Christian asked, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. It was the moment of truth. I could invent some excuse, pretend I was just visiting the neighborhood, maintain some dignity. Or I could tell the truth and risk complete humiliation. Dignity wasn't going to get me a place to sleep. "Christian, I am in a very difficult situation," I started, feeling my cheeks flush with shame. "My son, and there was a problem with my house. I have nowhere to go." Valerie and Christian exchanged a look, one of those marital looks that communicate volumes without words. "Oh, Sarah," Christian said, and I could hear the pity in his voice, which somehow felt worse than hostility. "I'm so sorry. I just need a place to stay for a few days," I continued quickly, "until I can figure out something more permanent. I can sleep on the couch. I don't need much." Another look between them. "Well," Valerie finally said, "I suppose you can stay in the guest room for a night or 2. But only until you find something else." It wasn't exactly a warm welcome, but it was a roof over my head. "Thank you," I said, feeling relief and humiliation in equal parts. "Really? Thank you so much." Christian took one of my suitcases. "Come in," he said. "I'll show you to the room." As I walked into the house, I noticed immediately that everything had changed. The furniture I remembered had been replaced with sleeker, more expensive pieces. The walls had art that definitely hadn't been there before. Everything looked like it came out of an interior design magazine. "Beautiful house," I said, trying to be polite. "Valerie has great taste in decorating," Christian replied. That was when I saw him. He was in the kitchen with his back to us, scrubbing dishes. But even from behind, even after 2 years, I would recognize that figure anywhere. The shoulders I had helped broaden with years of home-cooked meals, the posture I had corrected 1,000 times when he did his homework at the dining table. "Arthur!" I called out. He turned around slowly, and when our eyes met, my heart broke a little more. He looked different, thinner, much thinner. His cheeks were sunken, as if he hadn't been eating well. But what alarmed me most was his expression. There was no joy at seeing me, no surprise. Just a kind of tired resignation. "Hi, Sarah," he said in a flat voice. "You live here?" I asked, confused. I had assumed he would have his own apartment by age 25. "Arthur moved back home after he lost his job," Valerie explained before he could answer. "We are helping him get back on his feet." Something about her tone rubbed me the wrong way. It was condescending, as if she were talking about a problematic pet instead of a grown man. "You lost your job?" I asked Arthur directly. "The company had cutbacks," he said, avoiding my gaze. "It's been hard finding something new." "Arthur, go finish the dishes," Valerie said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. Arthur nodded immediately and turned back toward the sink. Something in that interaction put my nerves on edge, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. "I'll show you to your room," Christian said, gesturing toward the stairs. As we went up, I could hear Valerie's voice from the kitchen, talking to Arthur in a tone that made me pause on the landing. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clearly a reprimand. The guest room was nice, decorated in neutral tones with a twin bed and a small dresser. It was more than I'd had in the last 3 days. "Thank you, Christian," I said as he set my suitcase on the bed. "Really, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me," he said, but something in the way he avoided my eyes suggested he was already regretting the decision. "Just try not to cause any problems with Valerie. She can be a little territorial." Territorial. What an interesting way to describe his wife. "Of course," I said. "I completely understand." After Christian left, I sat on the bed and tried to process everything that had happened. I was grateful to have a place to sleep, but something about this house, about the dynamic I had observed, made me uneasy. It was the way Valerie had spoken to Arthur. It was the way he had obeyed immediately, without question. It was the way he looked thin, tired, like a burden, rather than a beloved family member. That night, I was woken up by a strange sound. It was around 2 a.m., and the house was silent, except for a rhythmic noise coming from downstairs. I got up quietly and peeked over the railing. Arthur was in the kitchen, mopping the floor at 2 a.m. He moved slowly, as if he were exhausted, but meticulously, as if he knew it would be inspected later. What kind of house was this where a 5-year-old man was mopping floors in the middle of the night? As I watched him work in the silence of the night, a cold sensation ran through my body. Something was very wrong here, and I had the terrible suspicion that the place I had come looking for refuge had just turned into something much more complicated and dangerous than I ever imagined. The next day, I woke up early, a routine I'd had for decades of working. The house was quiet, and for a moment, in that haze between sleep and waking, I could almost pretend I was in my own bed, in my own house, before my world fell apart. But the sound of shattering plates downstairs violently brought me back to reality. "Idiot! Look what you did!" Valerie's voice pierced the morning silence like a knife. I got up quickly, threw on my robe, and hurried down the stairs, my heart racing. In the kitchen, I found a scene that made my blood run cold. Arthur was on his knees on the floor, picking up the pieces of what used to be a porcelain plate, while Valerie loomed over him with an expression of fury I had never seen on any mother's face. "I'm sorry," Arthur muttered, his voice barely audible. It slipped out of my hands. "It slipped!" Valerie's voice went up an octave. "Do you have any idea how much that set of plates cost? $350 for a set of 8. You just broke over $40. Arthur kept picking up the pieces, and that was when I noticed something that broke my heart. His hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from what looked to be pure exhaustion. "Valerie," I said, stepping into the kitchen. "It was just an accident." She turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, Sarah. Sorry for the noise. Arthur is being a little clumsy this morning." "We all break things from time to time," I said, crouching down to help Arthur with the pieces. When our hands brushed, I noticed his was ice cold. "Sarah, you don't need to do that," Valerie said quickly. "Arthur can clean it up himself. After all, he broke it." There was something in her tone that immediately put me on alert. It wasn't just irritation over a broken plate. It was something deeper, more calculated. "Arthur," I said softly, "are you okay?" He nodded without looking at me. "I'm fine, Sarah." But he didn't look fine. He looked like someone who had been under constant tension for a very long time. His eye bags were deep, his clothes hung loose on him, and there was something in his posture that reminded me of a cornered animal. "Where is Christian?" I asked. "He left on a business trip last night," Valerie answered. "He'll be gone for 2 weeks." 2 weeks. Christian had been gone less than 24 hours since I arrived, and I was already witnessing this scene. What happened when he was gone for entire weeks? "Arthur, when you finish cleaning, you need to mow the lawn," Valerie said, "and then fix the garage door. The repairman charges $200 for a visit, and we are not spending that money when you have perfectly functional hands." "Yes, Valerie," he responded automatically. The way he said her name bothered me. Not stepmom, not Val, not even an affectionate nickname, just Valerie. Like she was the boss and he was the employee. During breakfast, I observed the dynamic more closely. Valerie sat at the table while Arthur made coffee, toast, and scrambled eggs. He served her first, then me, and finally served himself whatever was left, a piece of burnt toast and coffee that had already gone cold. "Aren't you going to eat more than that?" I asked him. "I'm not very hungry," he replied, but his stomach audibly growled, contradicting him. Valerie looked at him harshly. "Arthur is trying to lose weight," she said. "Right? Arthur?" "Right," he murmured. Even though he didn't look like someone who needed to lose weight, he looked like someone who needed a full meal and 12 hours of sleep. After breakfast, Valerie announced she had an appointment at the spa and would be out most of the day. "Arthur, when you finish with the lawn and the garage, you need to wash all the linens." And then she looked at me with that fake smile again. "Sarah, feel free to relax. You are our guest." The message was clear. I was a guest who could relax, but Arthur was something else entirely. As soon as Valerie's BMW disappeared down the street, I rushed to the backyard, where Arthur was mowing the lawn. It was a hot day, probably close to 90 degrees, and he was already drenched in sweat. "Arthur, stop," I told him. "Come here." He turned off the mower and walked over, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "What is going on here?" I asked directly. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean. Why does she treat you like this?" Arthur looked back at the house nervously, as if Valerie might appear at any moment. "She doesn't treat me badly, Sarah. I just have responsibilities." "Responsibilities?" "Arthur, you are 25 years old. Why are you doing all the housework like you're a servant?" His eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them away. "Because I don't have the money to go anywhere else." There was the truth, raw. "Tell me what happened with your job," I said gently. He sat on the patio steps, and for a moment, I saw the 8-year-old boy I had met so many years ago, vulnerable, scared, desperately needing someone to care for him. "I lost my job 8 months ago," he finally said. "The company went bankrupt. It wasn't just me, it was mass layoffs. But I had an apartment that cost $1,300 a month, car payments, credit cards. When the severance money ran out, I couldn't pay for anything. Why didn't you call me?" "For what? You had your own life. And besides," his voice cracked a little, "Michael always made it clear that I wasn't really part of your family." Those words hit me like a slap. Michael had planted poison in this boy's mind years ago, and now that poison had grown until it convinced him he had no right to ask for help. "Arthur, that isn't true. You are." "It doesn't matter," he interrupted me. "The point is, when I lost my apartment, Dad told me I could move back home, but things had changed. Valerie didn't want me here. What did she tell you? That if I was going to live in her house, I would have to earn my keep. That she wasn't going to support a 5-year-old deadbeat who couldn't take care of himself. My blood began to boil. And what did your dad say? Dad isn't home much. Ever since he married Valerie, he always has business trips, conferences, meetings. She runs the house. How many hours do you work a day? Arthur stayed quiet for a moment, as if he were calculating. I get up at 5 to start breakfast. I finish around 11 at night after cleaning everything up from dinner. 18 hours. He was working 18 hours a day as an unpaid servant in his own father's house. Where do you sleep? In the basement. Valerie turned my old room into her office. The basement? My voice rose higher than I intended. Arthur, that basement doesn't have heating. It's fine, he said quickly. I have blankets. It wasn't fine. None of this was fine. Does she pay you anything for all this work? He shook his head. She says my payment is having a roof and food. What food? You barely ate a piece of toast for breakfast. I eat what's left over, he said in a voice so low I could barely hear it. What's left over? Like he was a dog. Arthur, I said, taking his hands in mine. They were calloused and rough, the hands of someone who had been doing hard manual labor for months. This is not right. What she is doing to you is not right. She's not doing anything bad to me, he said defensively. I just need to prove to her that I am worth it, that I'm not a burden. And there was the heart of the problem. This woman had taken a vulnerable young man and convinced him that he had to earn his right to exist. Look at me, I said firmly. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You have value for who you are, not for how much work you can do. His eyes filled with tears again. Then why do I feel like I'm worthless? That question broke my heart because I knew exactly how he felt. I had been feeling the same way since Michael betrayed me. Because there are people in the world who feed off making others feel small, I said. And you have been living with one of them. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking. Arthur told me about the house rules. He had to be awake before Valerie, so she never had to wait for coffee. He couldn't use the main living room or the television. He couldn't invite friends over. He couldn't use the house phone for personal calls. He had to ask for permission to use the car, even to go to job interviews. Have you had job interviews? I asked. A few, he said. But Valerie always finds some reason why I can't go. The car needs maintenance, or she needs me to stay to receive a delivery, or there's some urgent project around the house. She was actively sabotaging his attempts to find a job. She was keeping him dependent on purpose. Arthur, I said carefully, has she ever hit you? No, he said quickly. Too quickly. Are you sure? Well, he hesitated. Sometimes she shoves me when she's frustrated, or she swats me on the head when I do something wrong, but that's not really hitting me. Yes, it was hitting him. It was physical abuse, on top of the emotional and financial abuse. Have you told your dad? Tell him what? That his wife treats me like a maid? How does that sound? It sounds like I'm a whiner who can't handle doing some chores around the house. It sounds like you are a young adult being abused by his stepmother, I said firmly. It's not abuse, he protested. She doesn't hit me with fists or belts or anything like that. Arthur, abuse doesn't have to be physical to be real. What she's doing to you is emotional, financial, and psychological abuse. He stayed quiet for a moment, processing this. Even if it were abuse, he finally said, what can I do? I have no money, no car, nowhere to go. You have me. The words came out before I could fully think them through, but the moment I said them, I knew they were true. Sarah, you have your own problems. You can't carry me too. Carry you? I stood up, feeling more furious than I had been in days. Arthur, you have never been a burden to me. Not when you were 8 years old and needed someone to help you with nightmares. Not when you were 16 and needed someone to teach you how to drive. And not now. But you aren't Your what? Your mom? I interrupted him. Biologically, I never was, but in my heart, in every way that matters, you have been my son for 17 years. And that doesn't change just because your father and I are no longer together. He finally broke. The tears he had been holding back for months, maybe years, came out in sobs that shook his entire body. I hugged him just like I had done hundreds of times when he was little, and I felt my own determination harden into something relentless. I hadn't come here looking to save anyone. I had come looking for refuge for myself. But seeing this young man I had raised with so much love being systematically destroyed by a cruel woman, my own desperation transformed into something much more powerful: maternal fury. While Arthur cried in my arms, I could hear Valerie's BMW pulling back into the driveway. He quickly wiped his tears and went back to the lawnmower, instantly transforming back into the obedient servant. But now I knew the truth. And a furious mother is one of the most dangerous forces in the world. Valerie had made a mistake by letting me into her house, because she hadn't taken in a desperate woman looking for help. She had taken in a lioness who had just discovered someone was hurting her cub. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Arthur's face when he told me about sleeping in the basement. I saw his calloused hands. I saw the way he flinched every time Valerie spoke. At 3 a.m., I heard movement downstairs again. This time I went down without making a sound, keeping to the shadows. Arthur was cleaning the oven. At 3 a.m., he was on his knees in front of the open oven, scrubbing the inside with a sponge, a bucket of soapy water by his side. He moved slowly, meticulously, like someone who knew his work would be thoroughly inspected the next day. I stood there for 20 minutes watching him work. 20 minutes watching a 5-year-old man do manual labor in the dead of night, because his stepmother had decided that was the only way he could earn his right to live in his own father's house. When he finally finished and headed for the basement door, I followed him silently. The basement was worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just that it lacked heating, it was damp, with a smell of mildew that immediately made me think of respiratory issues. Arthur's bed was an air mattress on the floor with 2 thin blankets. There was a desk lamp for light, and his clothes were hanging from exposed pipes. It was a room suitable for storing Christmas boxes, not for a human being to live in. As I watched Arthur settle onto that air mattress, pulling the thin blankets up to his chin in the damp cold, something crystallized in my mind. It wasn't just rage I felt. It was absolute clarity. This had to stop. And I was going to be the one to stop it. But I knew I couldn't go in like a bull in a china shop. Valerie was clearly smart, manipulative, and had Christian completely fooled. If I was going to help Arthur, I had to be strategic. The next day, when Valerie announced she was going to lunch with friends, I saw my opportunity. "Arthur," I told him after she left, "I need you to help me with something." "With what?" "I need to go to the bank, the grocery store, run some errands. Could you drive me?" He looked nervous. Valerie said I had to reorganize the linen closet today. The closets can wait. This can't. It took me 20 minutes to convince him to come with me, and he only agreed when I promised we would be back before Valerie returned. Our first destination wasn't the bank, it was the public library. "What are we doing here?" Arthur asked as we walked in. "Researching," I said, heading straight for the public computers. For the next hour, I searched for everything I could find on emotional abuse, tenants' rights, and legal resources for adults in domestic exploitation situations. I printed pages of information, took notes, and slowly began to build my understanding of exactly what kind of legal situation Arthur was in. "Sarah," he said after a while, "what is all this?" "Documentation," I said. "If we are going to get you out of this situation, I need to understand exactly what our options are." "Our options?" I looked right at him. "Arthur, what Valerie is doing to you is illegal in several ways. Forced labor, inadequate living conditions, emotional abuse. But to do something about it, we need evidence. Evidence? Photographs, recordings, records. Things that prove what is going on." He went pale. "Sarah, if she finds out we are doing this, that's why you have to be careful," I said. "But Arthur, what is happening right now cannot continue. You know that, right?" He nodded slowly. "But I'm scared." "I know. But you aren't alone anymore." Our next stop was an electronics store. With the last $40 in cash I had left, I bought a small recording device the size of a USB flash drive. It wasn't high-tech, but it would be enough to capture conversations. "You want me to record Valerie?" Arthur asked, clearly terrified by the idea. "Only when she speaks to you abusively," I said. "And only if you can do it without putting yourself in danger." I also bought a cheap prepaid cell phone, one of those that cost $30 and come with included minutes. "What is this for?" "So you have a way to communicate that she can't control," I said. "And so you can call me if anything gets worse." Back at the house, I helped Arthur hide the phone in the basement, under the air mattress where Valerie would never look. I showed him how to use the recording device, how to hide it in his pocket, how to activate it discreetly, but only record when you are sure she won't catch you, I insisted. Your safety is more important than any evidence. Over the next few days, I began my own silent investigation. Whenever Valerie went out, I explored the house, taking photographs of the basement where Arthur slept, of the living conditions, of the contrast between his room and the rest of the luxurious house. I also began to observe Valerie's patterns. She got up at 9 a.m. She expected her coffee to be ready immediately. She ate lunch outside the house at least 4 times a week, always at expensive restaurants. She got a manicure on Tuesdays, massages on Thursdays, and went shopping practically every Saturday. All of this financed by Christian, while Christian's son slept in a damp basement and ate scraps. But the most revealing thing came when I started checking the financial records I could find. Valerie was careless with papers, leaving bank statements and receipts scattered around her office. During one of her 3-hour spa trips, I ventured into her office and photographed everything I could. What I found made my blood boil. Valerie wasn't just living extravagantly off Christian's money, she was spending obscene amounts. $400 on a single trip to the salon, $800 on a single meal, $3,000 on a weekend at a spa resort. But what infuriated me the most were the internet searches I found on the office computer. She had been researching military schools and work camps for troubled youth, places that cost $50,000 a year and basically functioned as prisons for minors. Except Arthur was no longer a minor. She was looking for ways to get rid of him completely. That night, when Arthur came up from the basement to start his morning chores at 5 a.m., I intercepted him in the kitchen. "I found something," I told him quietly, showing him the printouts of the internet searches. His face fell as he read. "She wants to send me away? It looks like it. But listen, this is perfect for us." "Perfect? How can it be perfect?" "Because it proves intent," I explained. "She's not accidentally abusing you or doing it because she's stressed. She is actively planning to separate you from your family and isolate you even more." Over the next week, Arthur managed to record 3 conversations with Valerie. They weren't hard to capture because she verbally abused him almost daily. In the first recording, she was heard screaming at him because he had used too much laundry detergent. "You are a useless parasite. All you do is cost money and create extra work." In the second, she threatened to throw him out on the street if he didn't finish cleaning the whole house before she got back from lunch. "If this house isn't perfect when I get back, you can pack your things and sleep on the street and see how you do without anyone supporting you." But the third recording was the one that convinced me we needed to act fast. "Your father is starting to ask questions about why you're always working when he calls," Valerie said. "So here is what we are going to do. You are going to tell him that you decided to take a gap year to find yourself traveling. I'm going to show him the websites of those farm work programs in other countries. You're going to pretend you're excited to leave." "But I don't want to leave," Arthur protested on the tape. "I don't care what you want," Valerie replied. "I care what is convenient for me. And you are no longer convenient." When Arthur showed me that recording, I knew we had run out of time. "When does your dad get back?" I asked him. "Tomorrow night." "Perfect." That night, I worked until 2 a.m. on the library computer, preparing a full report. Every photograph, every recording, every document I had gathered, I organized it all into a clear, chronological presentation that showed exactly what had been happening in that house over the last 8 months. I also looked up information on tenants' rights and legal protections for victims of domestic abuse. Even though Arthur was an adult and technically not a tenant with a lease, the laws on forced labor and abuse were clear. But I knew the legal evidence wouldn't be enough. Christian loved his wife, and people in love often turn a blind eye to their partner's flaws. I needed something more personal, something that would touch his paternal instinct. So I wrote a letter. A letter from Arthur to his dad that he had never had the courage to write, but that expressed everything he had been feeling during these months of torment. "Dad," the letter began, "there are things you need to know about what has been happening at home while you are traveling. Things I've been too afraid to tell you because I didn't want to cause problems between you and Valerie. But I can't keep pretending everything is okay." The letter went on to describe Arthur's living conditions, the forced labor, the constant humiliation, and his growing despair. But it wasn't just a list of complaints. It was the cry for help from a son who had been too ashamed to ask for it. I showed Arthur a draft the next day. "You wrote this for me?" he asked, reading it with tear-filled eyes. "I wrote what you would have written if you had the courage," I said softly. "It's exact." He read the whole letter twice before nodding. "It's exact. Do you want to sign it?" He hesitated for a moment, then he took the pen. "What happens if he doesn't believe me?" Or, "What happens if he believes me, but chooses to stay with Valerie anyway? Then at least you'll know where his priorities lie," I said. "And we can make other plans." "Other plans?" "Arthur, whatever happens tomorrow, you are not going to keep living like this, I promise you." He signed the letter. Christian arrived home on Friday night. I could hear Valerie greeting him at the door, her voice sugary sweet, as she told him about her wonderful week. Arthur was in the kitchen making dinner, as always. But this time, the small recording device was activated in his pocket, and the letter was hidden under my mattress, waiting for the right moment. Tomorrow, everything would change. I just hoped that when the dust settled, Arthur still had a father who loved him more than he loved his own comfort. Because if Christian chose Valerie over his son, I would have to find another way to protect the boy I had raised. And I had no idea how we would do that without a penny between the two of us. But one thing I did know: I wasn't going to let this woman destroy Arthur, not as long as I had breath in my body. The war was about to begin. The moment came sooner than I had planned. It was Saturday morning, and Christian had been home less than 12 hours when I heard Valerie yelling at Arthur in the kitchen. But this time, there was something different in her voice. It was more vicious, more cruel, as if her husband's presence had emboldened her instead of calming her. "Look at you, pathetic," Valerie's voice cut through the walls. "Your father is here, and you are still a useless failure." I got up immediately and went down the stairs, but I stopped in the hallway when I heard Christian's voice. "Honey, maybe you're being a little hard on him." "Hard?" Valerie's laugh was like broken glass. "Christian, your son is a 5-year-old parasite who can't support himself. Someone has to teach him reality. It's just, he looks very thin. Has he been sick?" My heart raced. Christian was noticing. He was finally seeing what had been happening. "He's not sick," Valerie said dismissively. "He's depressed because he can't accept that he's a failure, but I already have a solution for that." "What kind of solution?" "I found some excellent overseas programs, farm work, construction, that sort of thing, places where he can learn real discipline and responsibility." "You want to send him away?" "I want him to become a man," Valerie said. "And clearly that's not going to happen as long as he can hide out here like a child." That was when I decided I had heard enough. I walked into the kitchen with the folder I had prepared. Christian was sitting at the breakfast table, clearly uncomfortable. Arthur was by the sink, washing dishes with trembling hands. Valerie turned around when she saw me, her expression instantly changing back to that fake smile. "Good morning, Sarah. Did you sleep well?" "Christian," I said, ignoring Valerie completely. "I need to talk to you." "Sure," he said, but he looked nervous. "What is it about?" I placed the folder on the table in front of him. "It's about what your wife is doing to your son." The color drained from Valerie's face. "Sarah, I don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I said with a calm I didn't actually feel. "Christian, open the folder." "Sarah," Valerie said, with a voice that tried to sound casual but had a dangerous edge to it, "I think maybe your age is affecting your perception of things." "My age is perfectly fine," I replied. "Open the folder, Christian." With shaking hands, Christian opened the folder. The first image he saw was a photograph of the basement where Arthur slept. The air mattress, the thin blankets, the damp walls with mildew stains. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "That is your son's bedroom," I said, That's where he has been sleeping for the last 8 months. Arthur? Christian said, turning to his son. Is this true? Arthur nodded, unable to speak. It's just temporary, Valerie yelled, until he finds a job and can pay us rent. Pay you rent? My voice rose. In his own father's house? Christian kept turning the pages, photographs of the basement conditions from different angles, screenshots of Valerie's internet searches for forced labor camps. And then he reached the transcripts of the recordings. What are these? He asked. Those are the conversations your wife has been having with your son, I said. Read the exact words she uses to speak to him. Christian read in silence, but I could see his jaw tightening with every line. The words were brutal on paper, without any emotional context that could soften them. You are a useless parasite, he read out loud. All you do is cost money and create extra work. Oh, I was frustrated, Valerie protested. We all say things we don't mean when we're stressed. Your father is starting to ask questions, Christian continued reading. So you are going to tell him you decided to take a gap year to find yourself traveling. He stopped. You were going to lie to me? You were going to make him pretend he wanted to leave? It was for his own good, Valerie screamed, losing all pretense of composure. Christian, your son is a failure. He's 25 and can't support himself. Someone has to teach him hard lessons. Hard lessons? I repeated, feeling my own voice turn dangerous. Like making him work 18 hours a day without pay? He has food and a roof. What food? I pulled out the photographs I had taken of the refrigerator. These are the scraps you give him. Stale bread, sour milk, 3-day-old leftovers. Christian went pale. Arthur, he said, his voice broken. Is all of this true? Arthur finally spoke. His voice was barely a whisper. Yes, Dad. Why didn't you tell me? Why? I'll intervene before Arthur answers, I cut in. Your wife convinced him it was his fault. She made him feel like he was a burden, like he deserved to be treated this way. Christian turned to Valerie. And for the first time since I had arrived at that house, I saw something resembling rage in his eyes. How could you do this? I did what you didn't have the balls to do, Valerie yelled. Your son needed discipline. He needed to learn responsibility. My son needed love and support, Christian roared, standing up from the table so abruptly his chair tipped over. Not an abusive stepmother. Abusive? I never touched him. Abuse isn't just physical, I said coldly. But since you bring it up, I pulled out the final photographs. These are the marks on Arthur's arms from when you shoved him last week. The photographs clearly showed finger marks on Arthur's arm. They weren't tremendous, but they were undeniable evidence of aggressive physical contact. Valerie was speechless for the first time since I'd met her. Christian, I said, pulling the final letter from the folder. Your son wrote this, but he never had the courage to give it to you. Maybe you should read it now. With trembling hands, Christian took the letter. As he read, I could see tears forming in his eyes. Dad, there are things you need to know about what has been happening at home while you are traveling. I've been too afraid to tell you because I didn't want to cause problems between you and Valerie, but I can't keep pretending everything is okay. His voice broke. I wake up at 5. 0 inches the morning every day to make Valerie's breakfast. I work until 11 at night cleaning the house. I sleep in the basement on an air mattress. I eat leftovers when there are any. Valerie tells me every day that I am a failure, that I am a burden. Dad, I'm not telling you this so you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because I need you to know that I have tried to be the son you wanted me to be, but I don't know how to be enough anymore. I don't know how to exist in this house anymore without feeling like I am a mistake. The letter continued for 2 more pages, detailing the daily humiliation, the isolation, the growing hopelessness. When Christian finished reading it, there were tears streaming down his cheeks. He turned to Arthur. Son, he said, his voice barely audible, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Arthur finally broke. He ran to his dad, and Christian hugged him like he hadn't done in years. This is ridiculous, Valerie screamed. Christian, you are a fool if you believe these lies. Lies? Christian turned to her, and now there was something fierce in his eyes. Are you saying my son is lying about living in the basement? About the photographs? About the recordings? He's exaggerating everything. He's trying to make me look bad. Valerie, I said with deadly calm, You make yourself look bad all on your own." Christian let go of Arthur and walked slowly toward Valerie. When he spoke, his voice was colder than I had ever heard it. "I want you to pack your things and leave right now." "What?" Valerie's face went white. "You're kicking me out of my own house?" "It's my house," Christian said. "And it's not your home when you use it to torture my son." "Christian, you can't be serious. We are married. We have a life together." "We had a life together," he corrected. "Until I found out you've been abusing my son while I was away making money to fund your lifestyle." "I wasn't abusing anyone. I was trying to make him responsible." "By making him sleep in the basement? By making him work like a slave? Feeding him scraps?" Christian's voice rose dangerously. "Planning to send him away without my knowledge?" Valerie realized she was losing. I could see it in her eyes. The panic of someone who realizes their manipulations had finally been exposed. "Christian, if you kick me out, it's going to cost you," she said, shifting to threats. "The divorce, the division of assets. It's going to cost you more than you can afford." "I don't care what it costs me," Christian said firmly. "My son is worth more than any amount of money." Your son is a failure who is never going to amount to anything." Those words were a step too far. Christian took a step toward Valerie, and for a moment I thought he might hit her. "Get out of my house," he said, with a voice that was terrifying. "Now, before I do something I regret." Valerie looked around the room, desperately searching for some ally, some way to regain control. Her eyes landed on me. "This is your fault," she screamed. "You poisoned them against me. You came here and caused problems." "I didn't cause anything," I said quietly. "I just exposed what was already happening. You are a bitter old woman who can't stand seeing other people happy. And you are a cruel woman who abuses vulnerable kids," I replied. "But unlike you, I have evidence for what I say." Valerie was speechless again. She finally realized there was no way out of this. There was no way to manipulate or lie to escape the truth. "Fine," she finally said, her voice venomous. "But don't think this is over. I am going to fight for what is mine." "The only thing that's yours are the things you brought when you got here," Christian said. "Everything else stays." Valerie stomped up the stairs, and for the next hour, we could hear her upstairs screaming on the phone with lawyers, throwing things around as she packed, cursing all of us. When she finally walked out, dragging 2 suitcases and screaming threats about seeing us in court, the house fell into a strange silence. Christian turned to me. "Sarah," he said, "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me," I said. "Thank him for surviving. And make sure something like this never happens again." Christian nodded, hugging Arthur again. "Son, we are going to fix all of this." But as I watched them embrace, I knew my own problems were far from over. I had saved Arthur, but I was still a 5-year-old woman, homeless, penniless, and without a family. Except, maybe I did have a family. Maybe I always had. I had just been looking in the wrong places. A week after Valerie left, Christian found me sitting in the garden, watching Arthur mow the lawn, but this time it was different. This time he was doing it because he wanted to help, not because he was forced to. There was color in his cheeks again, and he had gained at least 5 pounds since he started eating real meals. "Sarah," Christian said, sitting next to me, "we need to talk." My stomach tightened. I had been expecting this conversation all week. I had fulfilled my purpose. I had saved Arthur, and now it was time for me to find somewhere else to live. "I know," I said. "You need your space to rebuild your relationship with Arthur. I understand." "No," Christian said quickly. "That's not what I was going to say at all." I looked at him, confused. "Sarah, you saved my son. More than that, you were the mother he needed when I was too blind to see what was happening in my own house." "Christian, let me finish," he said. "I've been thinking a lot this week about us, about our family, about what really matters." "Family." That word hit me like it always did now. "Arthur told me about your situation," he continued, "about what your son did to you." I felt my cheeks flush with shame. I didn't want him to worry about that. "Sarah, for 15 years, you were more of a true mother to Arthur than his biological mother could have been if she had lived. And for the last 2 years, I was too selfish and stupid to realize that I had kicked the best mother my son would ever have out of my life." "You don't have to say this," I murmured. I already did what I came to do. Did you come here to save Arthur? I came here because I had nowhere else to go, I admitted. Saving Arthur was just something that happened. No, Christian said firmly. You came here because a mother's love is stronger than pride, stronger than shame, stronger than anything else. You came here because you knew, on some level, that your son needed you. My son needed me, I repeated, feeling tears form in my eyes. But not Michael. Arthur, he said. Exactly. We sat in silence for a moment, watching Arthur, who had stopped mowing the lawn and was playing with the neighbor's dog that had jumped the fence. Sarah, Christian said finally, I want to ask you something. What? Stay. Those two words floated in the air between us. Christian, you can't be serious. I am completely serious, he said. Not as my girlfriend, not as my romantic partner, as Arthur's mother, as the family we always should have been. But, Sarah, I'm 62 years old. I've been married twice. I have learned the difference between romantic love and real family love. And what you and Arthur have is real family love. I looked toward the house, toward the second-floor windows where I had been living as a guest. You don't need to feel pity for me, I said. It's not pity, Christian replied. It's recognition. For 2 years, I convinced myself I needed to find a new wife to be happy. But what I really needed was to bring my family back. What if it doesn't work? What if things get weird? Sarah, we just survived my wife abusing my son while I was blind to everything. What could possibly be weirder than that? He was right. Besides, he continued, Arthur already asked me if you could stay permanently. Apparently, he's been worried you would leave without saying goodbye again. My heart melted. He said that? He said he couldn't bear losing his mother twice. Those words broke me and healed me at the same time. Christian, I don't have money to contribute. Michael stole everything from me. I don't care. I don't have a job. We'll get you to find something, or we won't. I have enough money for all of us. And if Michael tries to cause problems, then we'll deal with Michael, Christian said with a firmness I hadn't heard before. Sarah, my son needs you. And honestly, I do too. We spent the next hour talking about the practical details. It wouldn't be weird, we decided, because it wasn't a romantic situation. It was a non-traditional family, but a real family. Arthur would have his mother back. Christian would have help raising his adult son, who still needed guidance. And I would have what I had been searching for my whole life without realizing it, a family that valued me for who I was, not for what I could give. That night, Arthur came to my room. He knocked softly on the door before entering something he never would have had to do in the old days, but that he had learned to do during the months with Valerie. Can I come in? Always, I said. He sat on the edge of my bed like he had done so many times when he was little. Sarah, he said, is it true that you're going to stay? Do you want me to stay? More than anything else in the world, he said immediately. But I don't want you to feel obligated just because you feel sorry for me. Arthur, look at me, I said, taking his face in my hands like I had done when he was 8 years old. I have never felt sorry for you. I have felt pride, love, worry, fury when someone hurt you, but never pity. Even when you were a 5-year-old failure living in his father's basement. Especially then, I said firmly. Because I knew you weren't a failure. You were a good young man who had been manipulated by a cruel woman into believing he was worthless. He burst into tears. Not the silent tears he had been shedding for months, but deep, liberating sobs. I missed you so much, he said between sobs. Every single day for 2 years, I missed you. I missed you too, I said, hugging him like I had done thousands of times before. And I promise that we are never going to let anything separate us again, even when you're a weird adult living with his mom. He laughed through his own tears, especially then. The next few months were a healing process for all of us. Arthur started therapy to deal with the trauma of Valerie's abuse. Christian cut back on his business trips to be more present at home. And I found a part-time job as an accounting assistant at a small local business, a job that allowed me to contribute financially without having to be away from home 10 hours a day. We also started new traditions. Real family dinners on Sundays where we all cooked together, movie nights on Fridays, birthday celebrations that actually meant something. But most importantly, We began to heal the wounds of the past. Christian apologized formally and deeply for being so absent during Arthur's years with Valerie. Arthur forgave, I forgave, and slowly, very slowly, we started to feel like a family again. The legal battle with Valerie lasted 6 months. She tried to get half of everything, as she had threatened, but the evidence we had gathered about her abuse of Arthur, plus additional evidence about her excessive spending and infidelity that Christian's lawyer uncovered, worked in our favor. In the end, she walked away with very little: some money, her car, and a restraining order that forbade her from contacting Arthur. During the legal battle, Michael tried to contact me several times. Apparently, he had heard through some relatives that I was living in another big house and wanted to know if I needed money. The sheer nerve left me speechless. But it didn't hurt me anymore. The last time he called, I answered. "Hi, Mom," he said with that voice he used to use when he wanted something. "I've been thinking about you." "No, you haven't been thinking about me," I said calmly. "You've been thinking about what you can get from me. That's not fair." "Do you know what's not fair, Michael? Tricking your 5-year-old mother into stealing her house." "Mom, we already talked about this. You're exaggerating." "I am not exaggerating anything, and I am not your mom. A mother is someone who loves you unconditionally. You used me and discarded me when you didn't need me anymore. That's my money. That's my inheritance." "It was my house," I corrected. "And it was my right to decide what to do with it. But you already made that decision for me. If you don't give me back what's mine, I'm going to." "You're going to what?" I interrupted him. "Are you going to sue me?" "Go ahead. I have copies of all the fraudulent documents. I have witnesses to how you lied to me. If you want to make this legal, let's make it legal." There was a long pause. "It didn't have to be like this," he finally said. "No, it didn't have to be like this," I agreed. "You could have talked to me. You could have asked for help instead of robbing me. You could have acted like a son instead of a con artist. But you chose the path you chose. So, that's it? I'm never going to see you again?" "Michael," I said, feeling a strange sense of calm. "You haven't seen me in over a year. The only difference is that now I am actively choosing not to see you instead of being discarded by you." I hung up the phone. He never called again. A year after I moved into Christian's house, Arthur got a steady job as a computer technician. It wasn't his dream job, but it was honest work. It paid him enough to start saving money, and more importantly, it gave him back his self-confidence. For his 26th birthday, he decided to move into his own apartment. I felt proud and sad at the same time, the way any mother feels when her son takes steps toward independence. "I'm not going to lose you again, am I?" I asked him, while he was packing his things. "Sarah," he said, stopping to hug me, "I'm going to live 15 minutes from here. You're going to see me so much you'll get sick of me." "I'm never going to get sick of you," I said, and I meant it. "Besides," he added with a smile, "who else is going to make those chocolate chip cookies I love?" The day he moved out, I cried, but they were tears of pride, not sadness. I had raised a good man who was now strong enough to live on his own, but wise enough to keep his family close. Now, 2 years later, I'm sitting in the exact same garden where Christian asked me to stay, watching Arthur play with the neighbors' kids who come to visit him on weekends. He has a steady girlfriend, an apartment he is proud of, and plans to go back to college in the fall. Christian and I never became romantic again, but we have built something better. A true partnership based on family love and mutual respect. We are roommates, co-parents to an adult son, and the best friends either of us has ever had. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Michael had never stolen my house. I probably would have continued living alone, convincing myself I had a family that loved me when I really only had a son who tolerated me. Michael's betrayal hurt me more than anything else had in my life, but it also set me free. It forced me to look for real love instead of obligated love. It led me right back to the family that had been waiting for me the entire time. Arthur is walking over now, sweaty from playing soccer with the neighborhood kids. "Sarah," he says, sitting next to me on the steps, "did you know the Johnsons want you to watch their kids when they go on vacation next week?" "Really?" "Yeah. Apparently I told them you were the best mom in the world, and they want to see for themselves." "I am not the best mom in the world," I say. To me, you are, he says, kissing my cheek. To me, you are perfect. And as I sit here in this house that has become my home, with this family I chose and who chose me back, I finally understand something that took me 67 years to learn. Family isn't about blood. It's about love. It's about choice. It's about staying when things get hard, about fighting for the people you love, about being the kind of person others can rely on. Michael can keep my house. He can keep my furniture, my jewelry, my physical memories. But he can't take away what really matters, the love of the people who chose to have me in their lives. And it turns out, that is worth more than any inheritance I could have ever left him.